I Found a Weird Orb in the Forest, Part 2, by Breinholdt. Hello, it's me again, the guy with the dark orb. I finally figured out how to feed the orb. For those of you who haven't heard Part 1, there's a link at the top of the video. But in case you're like me and you're lazy, I'll say this. About a week ago, I found a weird orb in the forest near my hometown. And like every other thing in that forest, it was hungry. I'll just start where I left off. It was getting late, and I couldn't stop the screaming. The orb was hungry. Don't ask how I knew that it was hungry, I just did. The screaming was about the same level as it was in the forest. I grabbed my head in pain and tried to crawl out of the room. On the way out, I accidentally turned on the lights, and the dark room was lit up. But soon after that, the light slowly started to fade again. As the light faded, the screaming did as well. I turned around and looked to where the orb used to be, and there I was greeted by the sight of the orb floating in midair and getting brighter. After a couple of seconds, the orb had completely absorbed all of the light in the room and was now glowing. And then it suddenly dropped to the floor. I slowly made my way over to the orb and I picked it up. I was surprised because it didn't seem any warmer than before, and the light was as powerful as a light bulb. With this new information, I started to search the internet again, and after 2 hours of searching, I found nothing. It was about 3 in the morning when I finally gave up and went to bed. Suddenly, I was standing in the forest again, surrounded by darkness with an awful feeling of dread. Around me, I could hear voices and footsteps. I couldn't understand anything the voices said except for one sentence. Use it to consume all the light. In my hand, I suddenly felt the orb, and it started to get warm. And soon after that, the screaming began again. The screaming was horrible. I felt my eardrums exploding as the screaming slowly got louder and louder. I looked up at the sky, and I pointed the orb at it, or more specifically at the thousands of stars that were laid out all over it. One after another, the stars started to disappear from the sky, and the forest slowly got darker and darker. At last, the only light in the sky was the reflection of the sunlight on the moon, and then there was complete darkness. Around me, I heard the voices starting to laugh, and the footsteps slowly started to come closer. There I stood in complete darkness, and I was afraid. I was afraid that whatever was out there, it was going to kill me. I fell to my knees and I started to cry. I had never felt so alone before in my life, and it terrified me. I didn't want to die alone in such a dark world. I felt a warm breath down the back of my neck, and I jumped forward, landing on my face. This was it, I thought to myself. I was going to die right here. But then, suddenly 2 words popped into my head. Fonzlumus. I screamed the words as loud as I could, and then the orb exploded with light. Before the light completely lit up the forest with pure white, I got a quick look at what was surrounding me. It was the creatures. The same creatures that had been killing people from my town for as long as I could remember. And there were hundreds of them. They all looked almost the same. They were humanoids with long arms and legs. Some of them were smaller than the others, and of course some of them were bigger. The last thing that I saw before everything was completely consumed by the light was the almost terrified look in their faces. I sat up, drenched in sweat, and looked around to see that I wasn't in the forest anymore. After a minute, I realized that I was in my bed in my home, and that in my hand I still had the orb. It was just a dream, I thought to myself, but it felt so real. After that, I couldn't sleep again, but that was probably because I was too afraid to even try. I decided to ask if anyone knew about the orb or something similar on some forums, but I haven't gotten any answers yet. After a day, I tried to throw the orb away, but it somehow showed up in my pocket. It didn't weird me out, but it did make me mad. Mad enough that I tried to break it with a hammer. I know, it might be dangerous, but I'm still an idiot. And since I can't get rid of it, I had to feed it again. I did this by turning on a light in another room, and as before, it absorbed all of the light. This is basically what happened since my first post. There isn't really anything else to say. I've spent my days researching the orb. And when I wasn't doing that, I played video games or something like that. I think I'll ask an old friend of mine that I haven't talked to for a while about the orb. He always found the supernatural things interesting, so he might know a thing or two. But again, if you have any idea what this orb might be, please leave me a comment. I'm sorry if this seems like a mess, but I haven't slept for 4 days now because of this so-called dream that I had. I think that the sleeplessness is starting to get to my head because the screaming the orb makes is starting to sound like words. This is all I've got for now, but I'll post again when something happens.